Hi, I'm Jill Wood, a Director of Academic Affairs at the University of Missouri System, and I want to thank you for making this investment in your professional development. The meeting to discuss your unit's assessment results provided you and your colleagues with the opportunity to learn about the intercultural development continuum and to get a better sense of the group results. By understanding that different people are in different places on this journey in intercultural development, you are better equipped to approach this work with empathy and understanding. Now, you have the opportunity to go deeper into your own intercultural learning journey. The first part of the video will walk you through the information found in your assessment results, also called your individual profile. Your individual profile was emailed to you. Please have your profile available as you watch this video so that you can review your specific results. The second part of the video will walk you through your individual development plan, which was also emailed to you. When you meet with your assigned qualified administrator, the person who will discuss your assessment results and development plan with you, you will have the opportunity to ask questions about your results, as well as discuss ideas for professional development to move you forward on this journey. And finally, I want to mention that your report is confidential. The only person aside from you who will view this report is the qualified administrator who meets with you about your results. Again, thank you for investing your time and energy to contribute to inclusive excellence within your unit as well as the University of Missouri System.
The report used in this video is a sample report. Please have your own individual profile available as you watch the video so that you can better understand your results. This video will explain the different components of the individual profile, as well as characteristics, strengths, and developmental opportunities of the development orientation that the IDI identified for you. It is important to note that each developmental orientation has strengths, challenges, and opportunities for growth, and one's placement on the continuum is closely linked to one's exposure to difference. In other words, you may have had little or a lot of contact with people from different backgrounds, depending on where you grew up, who you went to school with, the organizations you belong to, if you did military service, had opportunities to travel, or even the books and movies that you like. All of these experiences with ideas and people from different backgrounds contribute to your feelings toward an approach to difference. This is what the IDI measures. Later, when we go through your individual development plan, you will be asked to reflect on the experiences you have or have not had with people who have cultural backgrounds or identities different than your own.
This sample report provides information about your orientation to cultural differences as indicated by the IDI. So while your individual scores may differ, the descriptions of the orientation is the same. This will make more sense as we go through the report. The first 4 pages offer a refresher on the intercultural development inventory and a brief description of the 5 orientations, all of which was covered in the group debrief. It might be worth highlighting the second reflection question highlighted here for you from page 2 that asks if you have recently or are currently experiencing a significant transitional experience or big changes, as this may impact how you make sense of cultural differences and commonalities. Feel free to pause the video here for a moment and consider recent events and how they may have impacted your responses to the IDI. That brings us to page 5, which gives an overview of the components of the report. You'll see 4 components in this report: your perceived orientation, your developmental orientation, your orientation gap, and your leading orientation.
The first component, your perceived orientation, is a measure of how you rate yourself in terms of your own capability to adapt to cultural differences along the developmental continuum. The second component, your developmental orientation, indicates your primary orientation. This is a more accurate measure of how you experience and adapt to cultural differences and similarities, and also how others likely experience you. That brings us to the third component, the orientation gap, which reflects the difference between the perceived and developmental orientations. Most people have a higher perceived orientation score than developmental orientation score, which indicates an overestimate of one's level of intercultural competence. It's also possible to underestimate your intercultural competence or be fairly accurate in your assessment of how you adapt to cultural differences. And finally, the fourth component, or leading orientation. This represents the next steps to take in further developing your intercultural competence.
Starting on page 6, the report becomes individualized. The top of page 6 of your report will indicate your perceived orientation as measured by the IDI. Your perceived orientation can also be thought of as your aspirational orientation. This is where you would ideally like to be at this stage of your intercultural development. As you can see here, this person's perceived orientation is within adaptation, which means that this person sees themselves as a person who can effectively shift and adapt their behavior in culturally appropriate ways. Pause the video and take a look at your own perceived orientation. Then go back to page 4 to better understand your perceived or aspirational orientation.
If we move to the bottom half of page 6 in your report, you will see your developmental orientation. This is where the IDI assessment places you at this point in time. Your developmental orientation is adaptation, which means, as we discussed in your perceived orientation, you're probably able to bridge differences by shifting your perspective and adapting your behavior in culturally appropriate ways.
Page 7 of the report does what you may have already instinctively done, which is to compare your perceived and developmental orientation. The IDI calls this the orientation gap, and you can read more about it on page 8. It's very common for there to be a gap between your perceived and developmental orientation. And this is not a bad thing because it highlights your path to growth from where you are to where you want to be. As we'll discuss later in this video, your intercultural development plan will provide you with planning ideas to help you get there. Now that you've heard the descriptions of your perceived and developmental orientations, take a moment to reflect and consider how you see these orientations relating to your own experiences with cultural differences and similarities. Pause the video for as long as you need to reflect.
Okay, let's move on to page 9. Page 9 provides 7 characteristics to give you a more thorough picture of your developmental orientation. Let's walk through these together now. A person in the adaptation orientation can use a broad repertoire of practices to intentionally match those of another culture. They may be bicultural.
They have a deep understanding of at least one other culture group.
They're capable of taking the perspective of another culture to understand or evaluate situations.
They're capable of making ethical or moral judgments by considering one's own moral views and the views of the other culture.
They're sensitive to how authentic one's own efforts are at engaging in cultural diversity.
They're capable of acting as a cultural mediator between 2 or more diverse groups.
And they may be impatient or frustrated when other people do not perceive cultural differences as deeply as they do. The bottom of page 9 highlights a strength of and a developmental opportunity for your primary orientation. For adaptation, a strength is that you have a deep understanding of one or more diverse communities that you are able to adapt in ways that are acceptable. Someone whose primary orientation is adaptation is given the developmental opportunity or task of continuing to engage in behavioral adaptation while tempering your frustration with others who may not be as adaptive as you are.
To further help you understand how your orientation might apply to your daily interactions, your report includes a practical scenario or illustration on the top of page 10. A sample is shown here, but feel free to pause the video and read through the scenario in your own report. As you read, consider what resonates with you in your experiences. Does this illustration shed any light on any of your interactions? Last but not least, the bottom of page 10 focuses on your leading orientations. Leading orientations are the orientations immediately in front of your developmental orientation and serve as a preview of what's next for you. Take a look at the leading orientations identified in your report, and remember to go back to page 4 in this report to read the description of your leading orientation.
And that's it for the review of the individual profile. Our hope is that you will take this information and feel empowered to use it to increase your intercultural competence. Remembering that regardless of where this assessment placed you on the continuum, there is room to grow. To that end, let's now take a look at your individual development profile. This is the other document emailed to you.
Now that you have reviewed the results of the IDI, you might be asking yourself, okay, this is great information, but now what? What can I do to increase my capacity for effectively navigating differences? And that's what this portion of the video is all about. But before we start working on the question of now what, there's another important question to ask yourself. And that question is, so what? Or in other words, why does increasing your capacity to navigate differences matter to you? Why is it important? What impact might it have on your life, your relationships, your work? Pause the video here and give yourself a moment to think through that question.
It's important to have an answer to that question because increasing your capacity to navigate difference takes time and intentionality. According to research, it takes an average of 30 to 50 hours of intentional, self-reflective learning to move from one developmental orientation to the next. Your answer to the question of why this matters will help keep you motivated to do this important work.
So with that, let's go ahead and walk through the Individual Development Plan, or IDP for short. The sample plan you're seeing here is very similar to the one that you received. Let's start by looking at page 2. Here you'll see that the IDP is customized to your developmental orientation and is designed with 3 primary objectives in mind. The first is to help you gain insights regarding any intercultural challenges you might be facing and identify goals that are important for you. The second is to help you make connections between your developmental orientation and how you experience cultural differences and commonalities. And the third is to engage you in targeted and specific developmental learning designed to increase your ability to bridge across diverse communities. Page 2 also seeks to deconstruct the myth that exposure or proximity to difference automatically increases one's intercultural competence. Although it's true that exposure to difference can be a very powerful part of a person's intercultural development process, it takes active engagement, involvement, and reflection for that person to increase their ability to shift cultural perspective and adapt in culturally appropriate ways. Increasing your capacity to navigate difference is not a passive pursuit. It takes commitment, which brings us to page 3.
The activities in the IDP are designed to support you, but ultimately this is a self-guided process and you're in the driver's seat. This may sound overwhelming, but remember it's small steps that we take along the journey and the reflection on the meaning we are making as we engage in these various experiences that truly make a difference. As mentioned earlier, on average, it takes 30 to 50 hours of learning to move one stage on the continuum. That may sound like a lot at first, but if you break it down by spending 1 hour a week or 10 minutes a day for a year, you would exceed the upper level of that range. We encourage you to pause the video right now and think about what your commitment to developing greater intercultural competence might look like. How much time can you spend? What days of the week or time of the day can you reserve? What reminders can you set in place? Could you incorporate this into something you already do? Another nice thing about the self-guided format of this plan is you get to choose opportunities and mediums that interest you. Here's a list of 10 different learning opportunities that could be used to support your intercultural development, including training programs, films, books, articles, podcasts, or sites to visit. Pause the video for a moment, and as you look through this list, try to identify a couple of activities that might work best for you.
That brings us to page 5. Page 5 begins with a brief description of your current developmental orientation, which is within adaptation, and a reminder of the developmental opportunity of this orientation, which is to keep building your knowledge and skill set and develop cultural mediation and advocacy strategies to assist others in this process. Now take a look at these 4 tips for selecting developmental activities. Take a moment to consider the activities that you identified above. Do they correspond well with this list of tips?
The rest of the report provides an opportunity to think about, reflect on, and process past and current experiences, navigating differences, and is divided into 4 sections. The first 3 sections, 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0, are foundational, meaning they are common to anyone who has taken the IDI, and they set the stage for the section 4.0, which is specific to your current developmental orientation. The questions in section 1.0 are designed to stimulate reflection on your experiences with different cultural communities. This is important because this is something that we don't often intentionally reflect on or consider, but that may have a significant impact on the way we perceive and navigate differences. Section 2.0 invites you to consider intercultural development goals that may be important for you. As you notice here, these are set up as SMART goals and show not just the goal, but also encourage you to think about the process indicators or to think through how will you know you are making progress towards the goal. Section 3.0 asks you to be proactive and consider any situations or barriers you face that could interfere with your efforts to increase your intercultural competence. And then think about what you can do to reduce those obstacles. Finally, as mentioned earlier, in section 4.0, you'll find activities that are customized for your developmental orientation and task.
And that's it for this walkthrough. Please take some time to reflect on your individual profile and individual development plan so that you can take advantage of your time with the qualified administrator to ask questions or discuss ideas.